As many of you know, the Park Service has officially announced their plan for the park, and the only thing sadder than the plan itself is the fact that this was always going to be the plan. There wasn't, in my mind, any doubt that this delay in releasing it, or the taking in of public input, or looking at the actual effects of ranching on the land were going to affect what they were going to do. And I'll tell you why. Am I the only one who found it suspicious that they released their grazing plan before they released the general management plan draft? This was a long time ago with just the draft, not the official statement. And the grazing plan came out before the draft management plan. If you put that much effort into planning out the grazing, that means you're definitely planning on keeping grazing. If they were considering at all getting rid of ranching, reducing ranching, phasing out ranching, then obviously the grazing plan that included ranching on the scale that they intend to continue ranching would not have worked with their general management plan. What do you know? That grazing plan published back then magically fits within their general management plan released just now. If you've seen my film, there's a section in there where I show how many times that the Park Service has asked the public for input, and how many times the Park Service has absolutely gone the opposite direction of the results that their surveys showed. And then there was the recent public comment period in which 7,000 and some people, almost all of which said they don't want ranching and they want more wildlife, completely ignored, and the Park Service responded by saying, well, it's not a popularity contest. So then why did you even ask if you already knew what you were going to do? But it goes beyond any surveys that they conducted and then ignored the results of. It goes beyond any public comment periods that they conducted and then ignored the results of. It also includes scientific studies, some of which they commissioned, and then ignored the results of those. The current excuse that the Park Service is leaning on to defend their decision is this notion that they don't have any choice, that the Secretary of the Interior said that they were supposed to continue with ranching, according to Ken Salazar, who himself is a rancher. Wow, imagine that. A few things on that. So let's say that the Secretary of the Interior said, we're going to start testing bombs in the national park because it's for national security. Does the Park Service have to do that? Does the Park Service, with their mandate to protect and preserve, have to do it just because the Secretary of the Interior said, I think that might be the way to go with our parks? The way that the Park Service is currently managing Point Reyes National Seashore violates NEPA, it violates the National Organic Act, and all of these things mean that whatever Rancher Salazar has to say are in violation of the law. That's why there was a lawsuit, or at least in part why there was a lawsuit. And that lawsuit said that you need to reconduct your management plan out at the seashore. When that lawsuit won, Salazar's notion or direction or ideas for what the Park Service should do with Point Reyes National Seashore became moot. Now let's pretend that the Park Service is in fact legally supposed to continue ranching in the national seashore. Does that also mean that it is the Park Service's duty, and this falls on us too, the taxpayers, since that national seashore belongs to us, is it our duty to make sure that the private businesses out there succeed? Not just succeed, but create bigger profits for themselves? Because dairy, as many of you may know, is an incredibly bad business to try and make profits in, especially these days, and that's why conditions for animals get worse and worse and worse. It's so unsustainable. It's mind-blowing that these people use the word sustainable when they advertise what they do. It's shockingly unsustainable. It's so unsustainable that they want to kill elk for eating some grass, because that's supposedly going to make or break the industry. My point being is that Is the Park Service obligated to give the ranchers everything that they gave them? If you don't know what is in alternative B, the one that the Park Service prefers, they're going to not only keep beef and dairy out there, but they are now going to also bring in pigs, sheep, chickens. They are allowed to have row crops. They're going to be allowed to have horse stables, boarding houses for them. They're going to be allowed to have Airbnbs set up and create little farm stands and all that. I mean, the park is going to transform into what it's kind of already transforming into, looking like the rest of agricultural California. That's what the plan for Point Reyes National Seashore was, to become like everything else. Have you noticed how much of California is agriculture? Have you noticed how much of the United States is agriculture? You know how much of that agriculture is cattle or crops to feed cattle? And we need more of that so desperately that that's what we're going to turn Point Reyes National Seashore into, even though that industry is what has brought this planet to its knees. There's that saying that legality does not equal morality. There is a moral obligation to protect this national seashore, not destroy it. Do many of you even know that there were alternative plans that the Park Service presented and could have chosen? There wasn't just, it's either ranching or no ranching. There were some compromises in the middle. There were some that helped wildlife some and ranchers some, but the one that they went with hurt wildlife badly and helped ranchers exclusively. So even if you think ranching was meant to always stay in Point Reyes National Seashore, do you think it was meant to stay in Point Reyes National Seashore at the expense of the National Seashore? The message that the Park Service is sending to our youth, to our future generations, is pretty upsetting to me. You know, instead of being a voice of inspiration about how nature and how preserving some of these things is more important than economics, is more important than destroying the earth for profit, they're saying, you know what, actually the opposite is true. Even here, where a tiny bit has been preserved, even here, money is more important than the greater good. Thank you, Park Service, for joining the rest of our corrupt leaders in sending a negative message to the next generation. Allow me to read to you the opening line from the original enabling legislation when this park was created. And by the way, if you want to see that document or many other documents and other resources that I have provided, it's all on my website, so you can go and fact check all this stuff yourself. In order to save and preserve for the purposes of public recreation, benefit, and inspiration, a portion of the diminishing seashore of the United States that remains undeveloped. What you're doing right now is the opposite of inspiration. It is a feeling of despair. It shows that the only way that we know how to define value is through money. Although the ranchers actually cost us considerably, whereas the park and the park's attractions are the real financial jewel out there. But that's a whole nother video. Continuing to the next paragraph. The property acquired shall be administered by the Secretary without impairment of its natural values in a manner which provides for such recreational, educational, historic preservation, interpretation, and scientific research opportunities as are consistent with, based upon, and supportive of the maximum protection, restoration, and preservation of the natural environment in the area. 60% of mammals on Earth right now are livestock. 60%. 36% is us. That leaves 4% that are wild animals. 4% are left. But you know what we need? We need more cattle, even in a national park. And we need to kill wildlife for those cattle. Between the expansion of humans and urban development and everything else being used to grow food for ourselves, that was the inspiration for Point Reyes National Seashore and other national parks. But today we have a national park service that is writing into its management plan the killing of wild animals for more livestock, while there's only 4% of wild mammals left on the planet because they've been replaced with livestock. If you think that problem begins and ends with the elk, you aren't thinking this through at all. Consider what the elk are doing wrong. They are eating grass. Herbivores are a threat to the business of these ranchers. But now they're going to also bring in pigs and sheep and chickens, and you don't think that's going to create more conflicts with wildlife? You don't think that some of the predators that are out there are going to be tempted to get a little meal from what the ranchers are introducing to Point Reyes National Seashore? Let me say again, the elk were a problem for eating grass. They're going to be killed for eating grass. What do you think is going to happen to animals that eat their commodities themselves? The actual commodity animals. Goodbye coyotes, goodbye bobcats, goodbye, if there is really a mountain lion out there, goodbye mountain lion. Park Service assures us that that won't be a problem because they're going to closely monitor the situation and manage it as they see fit. Well, we have seen what they do when they closely monitor a situation. They let 250 elk die. We see how they interpret things when the wording is as vague as seen fit. As seen fit basically means, according to this current Park Service staff, favoring the ranchers and killing wildlife. And it doesn't end there. Did you know that 70% of birds remaining on the planet are poultry? Animals that are raised just to be killed? And now we're going to bring more of those into Point Reyes National Seashore, a place where the Park Service talks all the time about their endangered birds. If you watched my film, you saw how the birds that are out there right now try to use the fields, the crops that the ranchers grow to feed their cattle. I mean, they only have so much land to work with, so the birds, when those crops get tall, they come in and they nest and they hide and they give birth to their young. And here come the tractors that mow it down in the spring harvest right when the babies are being born. Now, that is scientifically proven with studies that were conducted and commissioned by Point Reyes National Seashore, showing how badly that is hurting their bird population. Even without the scientific studies, if you go out there, look at the ranches and look at the behavior of birds. Look at the flocks of birds that are hanging out at the ranches, around the feeding troughs, around the hay, around the silage, around grain, or whatever else is being fed to these cattle. There's birds there, and a lot of them. So now we're going to bring in even more crops. But magically, birds aren't going to try and eat in those crops or nest inside of those crops. Everything about this plan is bad for wildlife. Everything about this plan is bad for wild habitat. Everything about this plan increases the already insane amount of pollution via fecal matter that is taking place out there. Everything about this plan shows us that the Park Service is completely under the control of animal agriculture. Even if you're a fan of ranching, even if you're a fan of animal agriculture, there's got to be a balance. Every square inch of this country, of this planet, can't be devoted to human buildings and human food. And there is no balance taking place in the management of Point Reyes National Seashore. Okay, patrons, if you made it through that rather long rant about the announcement, here are your shout-outs. John, Danny, and Victoria, thank you for being the first of my patrons. It gives me a sense of hope that maybe I can get some support on this and keep going. It does mean a lot to me, and thanks for being willing to help keep this going. And you'll see this content before everyone else. I'm going to release it to you on the Patreon page. This one a day before I release it to everyone else. But The real value here is that you are giving me some hope to keep going with this. Thank you.